Okay, this is a good one. What's your opinion if all the various right-wing militias were basically recruited by right-wing governors or Trump to help the military? My opinion is that they would fail miserably against 340 million Americans. I've said this before and I will say it again. America cannot be held by force. We are too large, we have far too many people, and we have far too many pew pews. And the military would not take the help of a bunch of militias. I'm former Captain Mestenek in the US Army. We don't just invite people to come play soldier with us. Like, that's not how it works. We are a very high tech military. And as I've said before, even if they started training people right now, they would not be able to get this done in 4 years. In addition to that, I hear people saying, well, what if they take all the pew pews? Even if we stood on a line right now, all ready to hand in our weapons, it would take more than 4 years for them to collect weapons from 340 million Americans. The logistics here, y'all, you just got to think about the logistics. America cannot be held by force. The founding fathers did not give us, we the people, out of kindness. It's because you cannot control this land and the amount of people they hoped would be here one day. This is why we are a loose federation of states whom the federal government can barely tell to do anything. This is why New York is so different from Texas. America cannot be held by force, regardless of them playing games with militias, which is not a thing that's happening now, by the way. But if we were to see it happen, we the people. I'm Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I've been busy. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and going into the cult of the US Army. You can get signed copies attached here, and it's also on audio. Coming back to say, nobody has ever won a counterinsurgency when the people fight against the government. And our military is very, very aware of that after the 20 years of war that we just lost. The insurgents win. We, the people, if it comes to military force, the people win. The guerrillas win. Drugs won the war on drugs. This is exactly why we did so poorly with COVID, because Americans are not rule followers, and also because Felon 47 politicized it. But we saw this counterpoint exactly in Latin America. So I was actually in Buenos Aires. I was on the last flight out of Buenos Aires when everything was getting shut down for COVID. And we saw the Argentine military marching through the streets telling people to stay in their houses, right? And across the board, Latin American countries did very well with COVID. Other than Brazil, Bolsonaro was a Trump fanboy. And that is because in most Latin American countries, when the military comes marching through the streets and tells you to stay in your house, you stay in your house. They are much more of rule followers than Americans are. It has been said, actually, of the Germans about the American military, that the reason it's hard to beat the Americans is because the Americans don't follow their own doctrine. We do not follow rules. And this is exactly what I want you all to internalize and be very aware of the differences. Everybody's talking about Germany right now, but nobody's talking about how Germans make this joke about themselves, that the reason they've never had a popular revolution is because the peasants couldn't afford the train fare. Germans are overly rule followers. Just try to cross the street when the light's not green, even if there are no cars, and you will see. In America, we will tear up your train lines, right? And what I want y'all to really, really, really understand is that 340 million people over territory as vast and varied as America cannot be controlled by force, especially by only 2 million people. As the United States military knows very well, look how well we controlled Afghanistan. We do not follow rules. We will tear up your train lines. Americans. America cannot be held by force. I'm Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, former Captain Mestenek in the U.S. Army. I wrote Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult before going into the cult of the U.S. Army, and you can get signed copies here. Okay, can I elaborate on my Afghanistan comment? Yes, I can. I said that the United States cannot be held by force. Martial law is not feasible in the United States. And nobody knows that better than the United States military, who just spent 20 years fighting in Afghanistan. I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can get signed copies here. I was an intelligence officer and I went to Afghanistan twice. Now, Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires, and it is called this because nobody wins, and everyone goes and spends decades fighting there right before their empire falls apart. I once said this to my boss, but you know. And a huge part of that is because the terrain is absolutely ungovernable. They have valleys with mountains that are so high that it doesn't matter that we have air superiority, helicopters, airplanes, and they don't, because they can shoot down on our helicopters, neutralizing that. And certain valleys that the helicopters couldn't even fly through, mountains they can't fly over, vast, ungovernable terrain. Guess what? It's also only 45 million people and a quarter of the size of the United States. The United States is not governable by force. In fact, no country has ever won a counterinsurgency. Drugs won the war on drugs. It is extremely hard to hold people by force. And we were not able to control the people of Afghanistan with tons of soldiers. We're not going to be able to do it in the United States either, especially now that most of that combat experience is over here on the veteran side. Okay, so this is one of those things where if you are afraid of martial law, I really need you listening to military people with operational experience. Oh, hey, I'm one of them. It does mean that they wouldn't try martial law. This is coming off of a conversation where I said the US military found out that they couldn't even govern Afghanistan by force, much less the United States of America. Afghanistan has 45 million people. We have 340 million people. They say, does that mean that they wouldn't try? Probably, almost certainly, because US military doctrine is we do not take on fights where we do not outnumber the perceived enemy 3-1. That is our doctrine. And also, we are very, very, very familiar with the fact, as your friendly neighborhood intelligence officer, expert on the bad guy, that no country has ever won a counterinsurgency. The insurgents win. Drugs won the war on drugs. The guerrillas win. Right? Castro's people won. All insurgents have to do is wait. A terrain as vast as America, with 340 million people, borders that cannot be closed, tons of mountains and valleys, and 2 easily accessible oceans, is not controllable by force. Almost no country in the world is controllable by force. Certainly not America. Doesn't matter what insurrection act he wants to pull, that doesn't change the logistics. They might mess a lot of things up. We would mess them up worse. Oh, and for them to try, they would have to be absolutely sure to win. Otherwise, they would all be war criminals. And they can't be sure to win because we have so many people. I am former Captain Mestenek of the U.S. Army, 2 operational deployments, 2 combat, 1 doing combat patrols, and 1 as the chief intelligence officer for a combat battalion. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult. Already survived the labor camps, y'all. And then going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can get signed copies attached here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to week 7 of the Trump administration. Here is why America cannot be held by force. First of all, Almost no country can be held by force. No modern nation has ever won a counterinsurgency. No nation has won a counterinsurgency unless maybe we count Andrew Jackson and genocide of native peoples. Because all the insurgents have to do is wait. And they are defending their homes and their people. So they want it more than the ruling country. But secondly, there's 340 million of us. Our military is 2 million people. And it's one of the largest militaries in the world. There's 340 million of us. In Brazil, one time, they didn't like the outcome of a soccer game, so they rushed the field and they pulled the referee's head off. There's 340 million of us. We cannot be ruled by force. And then there's the terrain. And I remind you that I am former Captain Mestenek of the U.S. Army, intelligence officer for the unit. My job was to assess the terrain and know all of the hidey holes and all of the places. And I'm telling you, the way me and 500 fighters could hold some valleys in Idaho and completely neutralize the benefit of your air support, America cannot be held by force. And finally, Americans don't follow rules. The Germans have even said this about our army, that the reason that the Americans are so difficult to beat is because we don't follow our own doctrine. Look what we did when you tried to make us stay inside for COVID. Imagine what we're going to do when you try to make us stay inside for martial law. So yes, he's said a bunch of crazy stuff. He's a criminal in the White House trying to be a dictator. Of course he said crazy stuff. The stuff that they say they want to do, even coming out and declaring martial law, is them saying what they want to do. We, the people, we, the 340 million people, decide who governs us. I'm Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army, where I deployed twice to Afghanistan, where we learned very, very well in 20 years how impossible it is to govern a country and the people of a country by force. You can get signed copies attached here. Of course, have a day.